Welcome to another edition in this series of talks organized on behalf of Spiders, the sole platform for initiating discourses on equitable and resilient society. The talks complement a series of original papers published on the Spiders platform dedicated to outlining the building blocks of post-capitalist political economies and societies, not oriented around growth and profit, but rather good lives and a flourishing web of life in times of profound planetary change. Hosting these talks are founder of Peer-to-Peer Foundation, Michelle Ballance, and myself, Rokranz. And today, to help us outline some of these building blocks, we're joined by distinguished guest Claudia Yadira Caballero, author of the paper Buen Vivir, Good Living, A Motion to Change Our Path. Happy to have you, Claudia.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here and to participate in this talk. And well, thank you very much.
Oh, it's a real pleasure on our behalf as well. So to get right to it, we thought it would be great to hear from you directly a little bit about your background. So maybe both in terms of institutional affiliations, the networks you're involved in, but also, your kind of personal inspirations for doing what you do.
Yeah. Well, I'm a promoter of alternative currencies and alternative ways of life in Mexico City and in general in all the country in Mexico. And well, I'm economist and also I'm a sociologist. But really, I participate in some networks of community currencies. One of them is the Ecomún, and the other is a currency that has 10 years in Mexico City and is Multitrueke Mixiuhca. Both are networks of community currencies. And well, my inspiration, it's maybe it's I'm going to make some of history, but I try to remember where when start my inspiration for the paper that I write. And well, it started when I was a child. When I was a child and I lived in a peripheral neighborhood, and I realized the big difference between my friends, my child friends. Some of them lived in poor condition, and I started to ask to my teacher and to my parents why these inequalities happened, and no one of their answers convinced me. A few years later, I traveled to Chiapas in the south of Mexico, where there are a large percentage of indigenous people, and I was moved by the contrast of the poverty in the people and the cultural richness and the wonderful nature. And 1 or 2 years after, arose the Zapatist movement in the south of Mexico. That was in 1994. At that time, I was 12 years old, but I understood that the indigenous claim was not to obtain the material progress that we lived in the cities. Their goal was for respect, for the respect of their way of life, for their political, economic, and cultural autonomy. And there are, of course, other ways of living. I recognize that there was another ways of living that are respectful for the nature. And so I think this was a very important part of my history as Mexican woman. Of course, I'm not indigenous. I have always lived in the city, but I think that we should learn from those who have been able to conserve the 80% of the biodiversity of this planet. That we have to create other forms of life in the place where we live, in the place where we habit, and in our ecosystem. So that's why with the inspiration of some of these indigenous movement, with the inspiration of many thinkers in my life, I start to create this kind of alternatives based in community currency here in Mexico City.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that brief introduction. I think we will, yeah, maybe revisit some of these initiatives you're involved in a bit later in this talk. But
Okay.
for now, yeah, we thought it would be great if we could take a moment or give you the space to outline some of the basic tenets of your Spiders article. So the
Yeah.
article is, I thought, a very great introduction into Buen Vivir, its underlying principles, the different variations by different communities, and its contextualization, right, within the kind of global transition movements abound. So with that, yeah, the floor is yours, Claudia.
Well, I think that we are in a very difficult moment for humanity. Some call it crisis, other prefers to call it emergency and even collapse. But of course, we are in a breaking point. We know we have made many mistakes and we have to change it. And in this sense, I think all the efforts are welcome. All the initiatives and process that go in this direction will be very important. But the climate emergency, the great inequalities, the constant wars will not be solved by only plans and projects. We need to radically change how we perceive ourselves in the world. We need an existential change, a change on how we see ourselves, how we relate with other living beings in the planet, and how we approach with the world again. As Silvia Federici says, we have to reenchant the world. And it will not be a unique vision, as the slogan of the World Social Forum says. Others possible worlds are already happening. And in this sense, Latin American thought contributes with a perspective that combines the ancestral vision of Native people with the freshness of young feminist and ecologist movements. I particularly address in this paper to the good living, or how we in Spanish say, Buen Vivir. The good living are several practices and philosophies of life shared by many native people of South America, with different emphases and names, but with common characteristics to the native people of this region. I must begin by saying that the good living is not an academic concept. It does not arise from reflection and studies in books or at a desk. It comes from the daily life of the native people who interpret the world from their history and their context. Therefore, good living are life practices that are in constant movement, that resist situation of violence and dispossession, that find ways to exist. So the interesting thing is that good living as a sum of living practices that continues to be a way of life in many indigenous communities which have not been totally absorbed by the capitalist logic. They coexist with the capitalism. They are also on the margin of the capitalism, and at the same time, they transform it. So that's the interesting thing. But well, let me talk a little about the context. Mexico, it's my country, is undermined by mega projects driven by mining, hydraulic, tourism, highway, energy, banking, financial, and housing corporation. To all this, we must add the exponential growth of the drug industry and the trade. In addition to the dispossession of the territory, we are facing extreme violence. In southern countries, drug trafficking and femicides are social control techniques. And recently, with the pandemic, the conditions are more difficult. The region most affected will be the southern, and we already see wars for the control of territory, and the racism is increasing. We are facing a multi-sectorial war. And Latin America, in this context, has a dual process. For one side, it's a critic of the Western development, while simultaneously reconnecting with their own origins. We have found the way forward within its own history. Turn to our original habitants, the most humble, the most affected, and also the most wisest. Latin America has not forgotten. It has recovered its memory. And the good living has much to contribute, questioning a model based on a material progress. This approach recovers key position from the knowledge and know-how of ancestral people. And as I said, we must listen to those who have known how to maintain the balance with the nature. And that people are the native people, the indigenous people. So good living usually is linked to an Andean voice, Sumac Causai. Sumac means fullness, something excellent, something superior. And Causai is meaning life or is to be being. So therefore, Sumac Causai will be life in fullness, something like life in plenitude. I found an interesting characterization of good living by an author, Cubillo. She found that we could group into three the different emphasis that the actors and thinkers give to the good living. The first group is identity and spirituality. Here we have the practitioners who give a greater importance to cultural or territorial identity. They highlight the relevance of the regional context and the constant struggle for the preservation of the territories. The second group is the person who emphasize the equity and economic justice. They expose the social inequality in Latin America, particularly the original, rural, and Afro-descendant population, and they have looked for a proposal implement policies based on good living from the government. This most in the cases of Bolivia and Ecuador, that, well, they have a constitution where the good living is a very important part. So, and finally, the third group is emphasize the sustainable approach. And well, that people stress the need to change the civilization paradigm based on development for another way of life that respects and balance with the nature. So these are the three approaches that I think it's important to consider in the good living. But also there are three key concepts to understand the good living. One is the relationality that implies a vision where everything is connected and everything is interdependent. The second key concept is the complementarity that is based on plurality and an holistic diversity. And the third is the reciprocity The reciprocity that is a relationship between people is not a simple exchange of objects. It's a relationship that builds a common consciousness and creates a tie similar to friendship. Well, with these three concepts, we can understand that good living ponders on community. The sense of community is deeply rooted in some indigenous people. For example, there are even languages that do not have a word to define the self. This is the case of the Tojolabal, that is a language spoken in some village in Chiapas, Mexico. And they use the pronoun we, but they don't have I. So this change the way they are perceived the world, because the identity, it's not the separation of myself to yourself. But I think it's a little difficult to understand for us because we have another epistemology. But imagine that when we are saying I'm hungry, what I really want to say is that we are all hungry. And when I say, or I think I'm cold, really what I think is we are all cold. A good metaphor is that each person is like a wave in the same ocean. Each wave is different with a particular temperament, size, sound, but in the end, all the waves are part of the same ocean. Well, in this topic of community, I'm going to quote to David Barkin, who points three characteristics of the community. David Barkin is a Mexican economist, and he says three characteristics of the communities. The first is the autonomy, that it refers to meaning self-governments to avoid and resolve conflict. The self-sufficiency, that implies to provide the most basic needs, of course, material needs as food, health, housing, but also cultural needs like affection, recognition, and so on. And the third characteristic is the sustainable management of local resources, the management of the conservation and rehabilitation of the ecosystem in where the community is. Well, I think another lesson learned from the good living is their concept of nature. For indigenous people, the land is a generous being that they thank for providing and for the place they inhabit. The nature is like a caring mother. For example, the Andean people call her Pachamama, or here in Mexico, the Nahuatl voice. Nahuatl is also a language, indigenous language. They say Tonantzin-Tlali, that means mother, the mother earth. So they feel a deep love for the territory they inhabit, and there is an attachment to that particular territory. They identify it with its characteristic and create a way of life in accordance with that territory. However, they also have a global consciousness of the Mother Earth, because the Mother Earth is not just a small piece of land. It is the breadth of the planet. They have the notion of complex balanced relationships between the different ecosystems and habitats in the planet. This conception of the planet is drastically different from the one that has prevailed in Western life, where nature has been seen as something to be tamed and is studied not to gently understand it, but to take advantage of its resources. Well, so far, this is an overview of what is good living, but for me, the most important thing is not only to know a concept, and of course, not to romanticize it. The important is how the good living influences the process and the initiatives that we carry out. For of course, for the vast majority who are not indigenous and do not come from an original people, the question has always been, how does good living impel us to change and act from our own places? And well, I'm for 30 years, I have been in Mexico City, one of the largest city in the world. And in the last 10 years, I have witnessed the acceleration of capital, the territorial disorder, excessive debts, the increased consumption. People are spending more and more time commuting from one place to another. The city is overcrowded and the people is tired all the time. Technology promises to entertain people with all kinds of TV shows and videos, keeping them distracted from their lives. And in this condition, how can we think in good living in the cities? It's something maybe impossible. It's a very big challenge. And well, but we have good news because in our city and in many cities, there are sensitive groups of different size and vocation. Some call what they do solidarity economic, another the growth, self-management, cooperatives, and so on. Many, many names. Actually, I think the names do not matter. The names can change, but the if the essential alternative practice preserve, I think that's the important issues. So I want to talk. I want to talk about my experience. And well, as I said at the beginning, I promote communitarian currencies since 12 years ago. I founded the Multitrueke Mixiuhca, that is an interdependent community that tries to satisfy the needs of its members in a comprehensive manner, generating human and sustainable economic relations. To this end, we use the concept of prosumer. That is very important concept for us because the objective is to make interchange between us. So the person have to produce something useful for the others, and at the same time that he or she has to commit to consume from the other members of the group. So we encourage local production and local consumption, recover our productive capacities, and change our consumption habits. And for that, our principal tool is a community currency. We have decided to refer to local currencies. Some people say alternative currencies, and others says social currencies or complementary currencies, but we prefer to say community currencies because, well, we are part of a mixed culture, one that allows to take the best elements of the culture that make us up and substitute the values of mercantile society, competition, speculation, and predation with values of reciprocity, sharing, and respect. The models of community currencies seek to create options for a life much more harmonious with nature, a simple and loving life. We look for good being, good doing, and good living. So that's an important thing, because I think we have in the center that we we can uh, live in that sense, even when we are living in the cities. So the models of community currencies reject a logic of competence and seek to replace competition and war with a collaborative and life-giving logic. This is also important because we really believe that we have to change our mercantile society, our economic, utilitarian economic logic with another logic of giving and of shares. So community currencies in Mexico is a concrete manifestation of our complex economic relations. When we speak of community currencies, we really are speak of credit, community credit. And the credit implies a belief in the members of the group. This is very important because what we really do is to develop the trust between the people who participate in these communities. So for us, credit is equal to trust. I trust in you and in the group when I accept the community currency as payment for my products or my service. So when something is granted in the present, there is hope that there will be future compensation. It is a reminder of the value. I trust that in the future, you will reward what I'm giving you today. So it's also a compromise, a commitment in the time. And that's something that generates the bonds of the community. Well, of course, the future is also uncertain, and for the most part, holds a degree of risk. In the capital system, the level of risk is seen as a business deal and generate interest. Community credit turns risk into solidarity. The community currency is a very practical tool that allows to exchange product without depending on official money, or as we call it, junk money. But mainly it is a way to change the way we relate to each other with solidarity and trust. And this is what creates really community. We see the community as a political and economic act of intimacy, and that can transform the way in which people live, feel, and think. We become conscious of the generation of new political subjects that challenge the logic of the market. Community grants a sense of commitment, identity, and dignity that is only possible in the sensitive and conscious relationship that we assume with the others. Thus, the community becomes a fundamentally basic unit, one in which it is possible to recreate life, not individually, not as a nuclear family. It is the common subject that can experience the self-management of its capacities, resources, and organization. So, well, that's some of the work that we do here in Mexico City.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for that outline. Yeah, I firmly believe that there's a lot to be learned also from other communities around the world from this experience. As you said, also without romanticizing it, and also without, yeah, even academic appropriations of the term, and theories and jargon and yada yada, but really to learn from that and develop, yeah, like maybe use it as you will for kind of an epistemological break, and seeing how
Yeah.
that can be embedded in community-led economies. Yeah. Mm. Michelle, did you want to follow up with one of your questions here?
Yeah, well, maybe some questions about your community currencies. So I understand it's a mutual credit
Yeah.
system. I think that's usually what it's called, I think. So is this like neighborhood based or so? Can you tell us a bit more concretely, like who's doing it and how well is it going? These kinds of questions.
Okay. Well, actually, I think that we are more like a network in Mexico City. So we is not focused on one neighborhood. We have people that came from the south of the city, the north of the city, from many places, and we are in a garden, our urban garden in the center of the city, and we make some community work in the urban garden. Well, we are like maybe 70 people, 70 members of the group, and yes, it's a mutual credit. So at the beginning of our cycle, we give us a community credit, and we can use the money in a period of 1 year, and after that year, every member have to return their credit. So we finish our balance. Every person have to return the same credit that they have in the beginning. And I think that we are like a laboratory of financial issues, and it's really amazing that the people understand how works the money, and that the money is not an end in itself. It's only a way that allows to make interchange. It's just it just a facilitator. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
it only is a tool for the interchange. So that's the for us that's the most important thing. And another thing is that we sign we signed every voucher. So at the end of the cycle, we can have the accountability of every transaction, of every value that this value produce in a year. So that's how it works. And of course, the most important thing is to satisfy our needs. So the members of the group have to produce or to offer a service that is useful for the others. So we have many products for nutrition, for health, for transportation, some service, not too much, but some service. Uh, Something very important in the cities is to recover our capacities of production. Because in the city we don't have a sovereign alimentation, and that is a very important part for us.
Thank you. So just maybe another detail. I read in your bio you're also working with a school. So can you say something about and how is it different from like classical schooling?
I'm yeah, I'm not part of any institution. I'm not part of any private university or national university, but we have a little school. We said little school is a social initiative, and this library is part of that initiative. And we start to study and to reflect about community currencies, about solidarity economic, but also about many other topics. We have a transdisciplinarity, sorry,
Yes.
transdisciplinarity way of study to approach. So we study philosophy, biology, history, many topics, but our objective is to improve our initiatives. And we ask ourselves, what are we doing? And we try to reflect and we try to study about that and create another ways and create another perspective. I think that many initiatives are too pragmatic, and also we need to combine with study, with reflection, but also with even I don't know if it's correct to say spirituality, but we need to something subtle, something not material, uh, so not material, that allows to create a consciousness, a different consciousness. Yeah.
Okay. Rock, you can always interrupt me. I'll just, have a
Sure.
few things. So I worked for 6 months in Quito in 2014, when Rafael Correa was in power. And so it, was a good way to see a lot of the contradictions that were occurring. And so the contradiction between, wanting a good life in a more traditional way and, looking at indigenous people, but also, wanting modern medicine and education. And so in the end, despite using the language of Buen Vivir, there still was a very strong extractivist pressure. So what do you think about this? Is there any way
Yeah.
to solve this?
I don't know. It's a big question. I don't know if I can if I have a solution. But also there are a lot of contradictions. And for example, there are a lot of migration of indigenous communities. So of course, some of these communities live in poor conditions, and they have to start a process of migration. That's terrible, and that's one of the most important contradiction. For example, of course, there are a lot of extractivists. I don't know in a lot of Quito, Ecuador, but here in Mexico, we have many mega projects in the territory of indigenous, and some of them organize themselves and defend their territory, but there are other parts of indigenous people that they are not organized. So in one community, you can have a very organized, very conscious people, and also you have people that want the economic progress and want to go to United States and all that. So we have both parts, and I think I have talked this a lot with many people, with friends, with people that have studied a lot and have been part of this movement. And I think that we have the hope that this kind of spirit is going to be contagious for the other people. Yeah, that it can spread to the other people, but really it's a very big problem, and I think it's not a very good solution for that.
Rock, your turn.
Yeah, I think that kind of already answers my question. Of course, we can imagine many different scenarios of the future. Some more positive, say, Buen Vivir oriented, some rather not, a kind of continuation of neoliberal hegemony, extractivism, and so on. So I think already in your answers, you kind of implied the kind of theory of change that is embedded right in your practice, and what Buen Vivir as a practice here represents. But maybe we could, yeah, discuss a little bit about the relation again between your initiative and initiatives we could uh, kind of call aligned with Buen Vivir and so on in relation to this capitalist hegemony, and also perhaps like to this kind of notion that change at some point has to come both from bottom up and top down, and kind of yeah, if there has been some talks, of leading politicians, etc., of Buen Vivir, maybe as Michelle said, also some cooptations of this, as political points, but also maybe there are actual inklings of some change at that level as well, or some kind of support mechanisms and structures.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this thing is really interesting because the good living in Ecuador and in Bolivia, they have the opportunity to be part of the government and to be even in the constitution of these countries. And well, I have talked with some of the more important person in that process and some authors, and they believe that the answer is not come from the state, that it's very difficult to change the things from the government, but also they recognize that it's very difficult to work in the base with the communities, and that the process of work with the communities is always in a limit, and it's very difficult to multiply that process. So it seems like there is not a unique solution. It's not top down, it's not bottom up. We have another alternative that is not like that. No? So I think that we have to discover another alternative that maybe is not dialectic, is not one or the other. it's something in the middle, and that's why we are interested in study something that we call mesoeconomic or mesopolitic or I don't know, so on. So something that is not only in the base, and that is not that is not thinking in the government, that it's something in the middle. So but well, it's only an idea. It's really an idea. I think that we have discussed a little of that with some partners, but well, and I think the process in Latin America teaches something like that. We here in Mexico are experimenting a political process for with a president that came from the left, but that it's in the same way that Correa and that Evo and our president is he is he has the same mistakes of the other presidents. So I think that we really don't believe in the links with the states, and we are trying to create another ways with autonomy, of course, and maybe also beyond the politic and the economic logic. We need to change our perspective and don't think only in economic and political thoughts. We need to change with another perspective, and I think that the perspective of feminist movement, of ecologist movement today is very important for that. Mm-hmm. So we have to abandon the traditional way of thinking of left, of right, of bottom up, of top down, and we have to rethink everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very interested by your notion of mesopolitics. It's the first time I hear about it, but I think that's a very interesting way to approach the
I
problems that we're
think,
facing and the
yeah.
choices that we. Yeah.
Okay, I think I have a paper in collaboration with Luis Lopez-Gera, who is my more close partner. Maybe I can send you something of that.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that's a interesting advance in in concepts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that about wraps it up for this time around. Um, well, maybe as a last question, Claudia, although you said, names maybe don't even matter so much as the initiatives themselves and what's going on, but still, I suppose it's useful in terms of to maybe outline some initiatives by name or networks that people could kind of fall back onto, or if they would like to explore like the notion of Buen Vivir or like the underlying practices. It can be very helpful, I suppose, for some also perhaps based around Mexico or in other parts of the world to engage with this and support.
Okay. Well, in Mexico, there are some initiatives of community currencies. As I said, personally, I'm part of the Multitrueke Mixiuhca, and another network is the Ecomún. And we have a page in internet, a web, and we have also a Facebook. So maybe, I don't know if there are some people interested, I can give you our Facebook, maybe by mail, I don't know. And also there are a Latin American network of social currencies. There are many countries in Latin America are experienced, from Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, many countries in Latin America. And also we have a Facebook. And I think that are the most important networks and experience about community currencies and social currencies in Latin America. And also, I think it's very important to mention to follow the Zapatistas movement through their press release. This year, they plan to go to dialogue with people from other continents. They plan to travel to Europe and later to another continents. Maybe they go to Asia, to Africa, I don't know. But I think it's also important to follow them. And well, in other countries of other Latin American countries, there are also important experience that well, they have some of the influences of good living. In for example, in Uruguay, there is an important movement that more than 700 soap kitchens and community kitchens were set up in the first months of the pandemic. Also in Uruguay, thousands of people shop at the Mercado Popular, Popular Market, a network of more than 50 urban territorial, and they purchase its product from recovered factories, cooperative, and family farmers. There are a network, a supply network in Santiago de Chile. In Chile are happen very important things. There are networks that they are directly buy to the producers and to farmers, and they give that products to the most poor people in Chile. Also in Chile, there are many experience of community currencies that are also influenced by this kind of movements like good living, and also the movements of feminists and young people. So I think Chile is also a country that we have to follow. And well, there are many movements like that. In Colombia, also is a very important movement, the Regional Indigenous Council of Cauca in Colombia, and that's an important network that are creating alternatives of life, that are creating economic alternatives, and they have also a community currency. So in Colombia, there is also a network. And well, there are many experiences like that in many places in Latin America.
Thank you. Very interesting. And yeah, we can pursue that by email so that we can share some of these resources.
Yeah, I think it's better if there is a link of our Facebook or our web. I can send you.
Yes,
Definitely, yeah. We'll embed those links next to this talk for sure. Will be very helpful. And yeah, thanks so much, Claudia. I think this has been a wonderful kind of overview and also an account of firsthand experience of the struggle and perhaps inklings of alternatives to come that we can all engage in.
Very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. Thank you. Really, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to reading your papers also. So I hope that will be soon.
Excellent. Well, until next time.
Yeah.
Bye, Claudia. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.